And welcome everybody to the BA webinar marathon. We're really excited that you could join us today for Matt Allington's session on moving from Excel to PowerBI.com, a business analyst perspective. My name is Johan Blatos. I have a few introduction slides before I hand over the reins to Matt. Next slide. If you require technical assistance, please type your questions into the questions pane located on the right side of your screen, and someone will assist you. This question pane will also be the place where you may ask any questions throughout the presentation, and we'll probably take a break every 50 minutes or so to answer those questions. Feel free to enter your questions at any time, and I'll read those questions out to the speaker when he's ready for them. You are able to zoom in on the presentation contents by using the zoom button located on top of the presentation window. Note that there will be a short evaluation at the end of the session, and your feedback is really important to us, so please take a moment to complete it. It will appear in your web browser. Next slide. If you like what you hear in these webinars, make sure to attend the PAS Business Analytics Conference taking place May the 2nd to the 4th in San Jose, California. With hands-on learning opportunities from data and business analytic experts and a variety of networking opportunities, the PAS Business Analytics Conference is a great opportunity to gain valuable skills and advance your career. All webinar registrants get $100 off the 2-day pass. Just use discount code BA Marathon during the registration. Visit passbaconference.com to register today, as the discount code expires on January the 1st. Next slide. And if you're interested in accessing other free educational content, the PAS organization has a variety of virtual chapters which offer free webinars to their members every month. Check out upcoming webinars and recordings of past webinars from our Business Analytics, Excel BI, Business Intelligence, Big Data, and Cloud virtual chapters by visiting sqlpass.org/bc. Next slide. This BA Marathon session is presented by Matt Allington. As you can see on the slide, he has a long, distinguished career at Coca-Cola, and now running a PowerBI startup consultancy in Australia. And he has just released a new book, Learn to Write Text. Next slide. So, without further ado, here's Matt Allington with Moving from Excel to PowerBI.com, a business analyst perspective.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Johan, and welcome to everyone. Thank you for joining us here this afternoon. So as the topic of my presentation suggests, I'm going to focus on moving from Excel to PowerBI.com, and there's a lot of other material about Power BI available on the web through YouTube and the Power BI website. And so I'm not going to spend as much time on the visualizations and some of the techniques that you can pick up in other places, but instead I'm going to focus on giving you information to help you get started if you're coming from an Excel background, and so that's going to be the main focus of my presentation today. But before we start, I do have a couple of questions that I'd like to ask each of you. So we have a poll, and in a moment I'll put the question up on the screen and give you a moment to respond. But there's three things basically I'd like to ask. Firstly, I'd like to know the type of profile you have in your work environment. So are you a business analyst type person who analyzes data, so a business person, or perhaps you're coming from an IT background and then maybe there's some other that doesn't really fit either of those. So that's the first question. And then secondly and thirdly, I'd like to understand if you're using Power Pivot and or PowerBI Desktop, just so I get a sense of where everyone in the audience is at. So I'm going to ask the first question now, and I'll leave that poll open for a few moments, and we'll see. Okay, so it seems, so the answers are coming in. We have perhaps a few more IT people at the moment than business analysts, but overall pretty even sort of mix. I'll just leave that open for another couple of moments to give everyone a chance to answer. Okay, so I'm going to close that question off now. So we've actually got 54% people from an IT background and 38% from a BA background. So the second question then is, are you already using Power Pivot for Excel? And so that question should be on the screen now. And quite a strong response here, very good. So we've got about 60% of people who are already using Power Pivot for Excel, so that's good to know. I'll give that a couple more seconds just to give other people a chance to respond. Okay, so I'll close that. So yeah, so almost 2/3 of the people are using Power Pivot for Excel at the moment, which is terrific. And then the last question is, are you using PowerBI Desktop or PowerBI.com? And I guess given that this session is targeted at people moving from Excel to PowerBI.com, then you would expect a higher percentage who are not, and so it's about 2/3. But interestingly, there's about 1/3 of people that are already using PowerBI.com. Okay, so I'm going to close that out about now. Okay, so thanks for that information, and so I'm going to be talking about traditional Excel and also Power Pivot for Excel in the first part of the conversation, and then the migration path over to Power BI, and then a lot of my focus is going to be on the differences between the two products, Power Pivot for Excel and Power BI. So I also have a number of slides up front just to set the stage, so I'm going to start off with those slides. So first of all, I want to talk about why Power BI is so great. So first of all, as many of you would know, Power BI is a self-service BI solution, exactly the same as Power Pivot. And the reason this is important is because it makes BI accessible to business users in a way that's never been possible before. And so really the way that you needed to do BI in the past was to go through the IT department, and not that that's right or wrong, but it has its own challenges, and making BI accessible to business users on the desktop is a real evolution and revolution, and so the self-service BI approach is relatively new and very powerful. Secondly, why I like Power BI is it's an evolution of SQL Server analysis services, and in fact I'd even go as far as saying it's a revolution. So it's built on the solid framework that Microsoft has built over 15 plus years for analysis services, and on top of that it's taken new technology like the tabular data model and in-memory processing, and it's using these new technologies on the solid base of analysis services. And what this means to the typical end user or the typical Excel or business user is you've got enormous capacity to process data. So 1 million, 50 million, 100 million rows of data is not a problem within Excel and Power BI, and so that's a big step up from a traditional Excel world. It's really fast, great user experience, and because it's a Microsoft product, it's very familiar to most of us who live in a Microsoft world, and it has that strength underlying it, which makes it a robust solution, as I mentioned. So Power BI has two versions. There's a cloud version and a desktop version. The desktop version is actually completely standalone, and you can do analysis and reporting directly in the desktop without sharing it. The cloud version is really designed to share your workbooks and push them up into the cloud. And so you end up having this paradigm where you can build your solutions locally and then easily share them through the cloud. Another thing I really like about Power BI is it has this open visualization framework, and so basically what that means is that it's almost like an open source development framework where anyone with a technical skill can build a visualization on top of the Power BI framework and use it internally within their business if they have a specific need, or perhaps even better is to share that visualization with the broader community. And what this means is that the pace of change and development of the new visualization capabilities is really quite phenomenal, and there's there was a competition recently where people submitted their entries, and there's a lot of really good visualizations that came out of that. And the last thing I really like about Power BI is just the frequency of updates direct from Microsoft. So PowerBI.com has a weekly update, and the desktop has a monthly update. And so quite literally things that are underdeveloped or not available in the month of November literally get solved in the month of December in many cases, and so on. And so the pace of change has just been great. I want to talk a little bit about why I think self-service BI is such a game changer. So there's basically two ways of doing BI now. There's the old way, or perhaps the old way is not the right term, it's the traditional BI way. And so the traditional BI way basically looks like this, where you have a business analyst who goes through the process of documenting the requirements and passing it over to the IT department, who then prioritizes and designs and selects a solution, those sorts of things. And then they build and deliver the solution. And really the outcome from this build and delivery falls into two general buckets. Sometimes the solution doesn't meet the needs, and sometimes the solution does meet the needs. But business users, as they tend to be, if you get this case where the solution doesn't meet the needs, it's not uncommon for a BA to give up and to build their own solution in Excel anyway. And so obviously that can have some negative impacts on the return from the investment. And then in the case where the solution does meet the needs, that may work for a period of time, but at some point in time the BA is going to export that data into Excel to do further analysis for reasons of changing business needs and those sorts of things. And so all of these things take time and cost money. There's definitely a place for traditional BI in business, but it's not the only way to do BI today. So this is the way the self-service BI process works. So first of all, the BA thinks through the requirements, and then they start to build their own solution in PowerBI Desktop or maybe Power Pivot for Excel. And as they start to build the solution, what they find is quite often what they asked for or what they thought they needed is not what they need. Now, over on the left-hand side here, IT basically didn't have the insights that the analyst has him or herself when they do it themselves. And so you have this opportunity of continuous improvement where the BA learns by doing and continuously improves the solution, changing the requirements all the way along, something which is just not possible and practical within a traditional IT project. And then at some point in time, the report then gets shared with people, and because they've had this opportunity for continuous improvement, the customers are really amazed and pleased with the solution. And when I first started down this journey, I thought that what this would mean is that the analysts would have a lot more time to do more analysis and thinking. But the reality is that what happens is the floodgates get open up. So people who've got latent demand for reporting and analysis who never would have asked before because basically they couldn't get their needs met, they come out of the woodwork and start asking for more and more requests, and then the cycle starts again. And then the good thing about this process is that it's efficient, fast, and in many cases fit for purpose, particularly for some of these shorter term business analysis needs. Okay, so the main part of the topic today is really to talk about moving from Excel to Power BI. So I thought I would talk about the differences, the key differences between Excel and Power BI. So first of all, in Excel, for business analysts, it's a very familiar spreadsheet paradigm. And so what I mean by that is you have a sheet, you have columns and rows. Every cell is a standalone unit, and you can put any formula you want in any cell, point to any other cell. This is what business analysts grow up with, and this is their bread and butter, and this is what they're familiar with. Power BI is not the same as that, and it can be quite unfamiliar. It's a reporting database paradigm. Now, for the people on the call that come from IT or probably work with SQL Server, this is not going to be an issue for you. It'll be a very familiar space. But for business analysts who have never done any database reporting before, it's quite a a journey to move your thinking from Excel spreadsheets into more of these Power Pivot, Power BI reporting tools. And so that's something that you need to learn. Secondly, Power Pivot predominantly, which is the self-service tool for Excel, comes in 3 different versions. There's various levels of polished. 2013, in fact, is the least polished version. 2010 is a bit better. 2016 is quite good and is almost as good, I think, now as Power BI Desktop. Power BI, on the other hand, is an all-in-one package which has been written from scratch. And so they've taken Power Query and Power Pivot, which were originally developed over here inside Excel, and then they've bundled it with a brand new visualization layer, which is completely new, and put them together to make this product Power BI. So there's the desktop and the cloud-based version, and we're going to talk quite a bit about that as we move forward. Okay, in Excel it's quite difficult to share large files. Now, in the past where you had a 100 million row limit in Excel, that probably wasn't a problem, but with Power Pivot and 50 million rows of data, your workbooks can be 100, maybe 300 megabytes, and it then becomes difficult to share those workbooks with other people. Power BI solves that problem, which is one of the main reasons why it's good to get started in Power BI, because it makes sharing these reports and large files a snap. Excel also is limited in many companies to a 32-bit version. Now the issue here is that Microsoft Office, you have to make a decision up front. Is it 32-bit or is it 64-bit? Now Power Pivot for Excel really benefits from 64-bit Office. And so that means if you want to make that change, you have to move your entire Office suite from 32-bit to 64-bit. And that can be a problem in some companies, and generally IT departments have not made that change over the years, and frankly there's never been a reason to make that change prior to Power Pivot. There's definitely value in making that change with Power Pivot, but it can be a problem for some companies. And so at least there is the option in the Power BI world to have a 64-bit version of Power BI Desktop, even if you only have the 32-bit version of Excel. Now there are a couple of tricks and workarounds that you may need to do depending on your environment, but certainly that is a possibility. And I also now just want to talk about the types of analysis and reporting that are really a good fit for Power BI. And not all analysis and reporting that analysts do are a good fit for Power BI. So these are the things that you should be looking for. If you're doing one or more of these things, then you're a good candidate for moving some of your work to Power BI. So first of all, if you do analysis and reporting over tables of data that need aggregating, and so the typical scenario here would be that you have a single table of data in Excel, and the first thing you do is put a pivot table on top of that table and start summarizing the data. So if you're doing a lot of that type of reporting, then Power BI is a good fit. Secondly, if you're doing reporting where you need to write a lot of VLOOKUPs, or maybe you're using index match within Excel, and or if you're doing a lot of repetitive manual work every week, maybe every month, to bring in new data from another system and refresh your spreadsheets and redo all your formulas, if you're doing that on a regular basis, that's also a good fit for Power Pivot or Power BI. And then thirdly, in many cases, not all cases, but in some cases, you simply just can't get the help you need from IT for whatever reason, because their capacity is already at max, or they can't meet your time horizon for whatever reason, or the cost of the enterprise strength solution is just not worth it compared with the benefit, and you're looking for a shorter, a cheaper solution. And so all three of those areas are ideal candidates for either Power Pivot or Power BI. Okay, I might just pause there and ask Johan if there's any questions before we move into the demo.
Yeah, we've got one question from Alan. Does Power BI have a programmable object model underneath?
It's a good question. So I don't believe it does in Power BI Desktop. In Power Pivot for Excel 2016, the data model is now available in quite an extensive way for VBA. So it is possible, for example, to create Power Queries and do data modeling using VBA, but only in Excel 2016. In Excel 2013 and 2010, there is very limited support for data model and no support for Power Query.
All right, and there's also, just let's see now, I heard that DAX is single-threaded. Is this true?
No, I don't believe that is true. So it's quite a complex question. So DAX actually has two engines. It has what's called the storage engine and the formula engine. And the storage engine is really fast and multi-threaded and is really where the power of the tabular data model comes from. And the formula engine is very capable granular level analysis, but it's only single-threaded. And so one of the skills that you learn in DAX over time is to write your formulas in such a way that you can leverage the multi-threading of the storage engine wherever possible to get snappy results, and only use the formula engine, which is single-threaded, at a time that you actually need to do that.
All right, that was the questions so far.
Okay, good. Okay, so I'm now going to move into hands-on demo mode. So I've got about 20 minutes or so, and I'm going to start off by going into Excel, and the first thing I'm going to do is open a traditional Excel workbook just to set the scenes of where we're coming from. And so, so this is where a typical business analyst may be operating today. So they have a table of data which has been extracted from some ERP system or some transactional system. In this case, my data is coming from the Microsoft AdventureWorks database, which is a bicycle business that sells bicycles and clothing and other products. And so this is a typical extract from that transactional system. So there's a product number and a customer number. And the first thing an analyst would typically do with this is to insert a pivot table over the top. As I mentioned before, Excel automatically finds the range, and you can start to do, you can bring cost and sell and start to summarize your data using a pivot table. But of course, there's a few problems with this approach. You know, very few people are interested in seeing the sales for a product number. They prefer to see either the product number or perhaps even more so some sort of aggregation rolling up the product hierarchy into subcategory or maybe even category. And so the next thing that needs to happen then in this sort of traditional world is that you need to go and access product information, which you can link back to your sales data, and also customer information, and this can go on and on. But you need this information, of course, if you want to be able to summarize and roll up your sales data based on these measures. Now, a really important point here, if I go back to this sales table, these product numbers and customer numbers, for the analyst, if they want to bring more data in, they would typically then go and write a lookup. And so here I have the same copy of the data with a VLOOKUP, and we're looking up the product key, we're reaching out to the products table, and we're bringing back the product category into this column. And then once you've done that, of course, you do the same for your customer table and copy that formula down. I don't know if you can tell, I've got 4 processes going here, and it takes quite a bit of time. Even this table is only 60,000 rows of data, and even with that small amount of data, once you start putting VLOOKUPs in, the spreadsheet starts to slow down. Now, this is a really important point for Excel users moving to Power Pivot or to Power BI, and that is that this VLOOKUP is working on the product key here, which can be repeated in the sales table, and it's going over to the products table and it's trying to find a match in the products table. And so when you write these VLOOKUPs, we're going to use exactly the same approach when we join our tables inside Power Pivot and Power BI, so just keep that in mind. And so at some point you'll end up with a single flat table like this, and then the next step, of course, now that I've got the categories and customer information, is to set up a pivot table. And so here's my pivot table. But what I see happen often is that the pivot table doesn't meet all of the business requirements. And so we've got sales and cost here, but we don't have anything for margin. And so what I see often happening is that people will start writing formulas inside the Excel spreadsheet to solve that problem. So now I have a formula for margin, and I have a formula for margin percent. And that's all fine up until the point where you decide to change your pivot table and start to use some customer information, and now the formulas that you've written don't meet and don't match anymore. Now there's some ways around this. You can put if formulas, and you can copy the formatting from your pivot table using Format Painter and make it look better, but at the end of the day there's a better way of doing the solution than doing it this way. So just in summary, there's many reasons not to do this type of analysis in Excel, and those reasons are that, first of all, every time you build a spreadsheet like this, you're actually building it on static content. And so next month, next week, when you have new data, you have to go back and do some rework, bring in the new data, repoint your VLOOKUPs, all those sorts of things. Secondly, every report you build using a pivot table is a bespoke one-off solution, custom built for purpose. So there's very little reuse between reports. You're actually not expanding the reusability of your tool. Thirdly, the workbook becomes slow, as I mentioned before. Excel does have a 1 million row limit, but in my experience it gets almost unusable well before you hit the 1 million row limit. And finally, there's just simply a better way, and that is to use Power Pivot and Power Query if you're using Excel, or even better, move into the new tools Power BI, which combines the power of all of these things. Okay, so that's the traditional way. So let's talk about Power Pivot now. I like to call this modern Excel, which is a term which was developed by Rob Colley. And let me start off over here. I'm on the, just let me load this workbook. And so, excuse me while I clear my throat. So basically self-service BI tools come in two broad groups. So first of all, there's the Excel suite, and so there's the traditional pivot tables. These are very mature and established. They haven't changed really at all as a result of Power Pivot. And then there's Power Pivot and Power Query that are relatively new and developed inside and for Excel. And then more recently is the Power BI suite. So Power BI visualizations are brand new, and they're growing rapidly by the community and also Microsoft. And then these two products are almost identical. In fact, just an improvement on the Excel version. And so key point is, if you learn these skills here in Excel, it's actually a relatively painless migration through to Power BI. There's some benefits of using this approach, including you're working with multiple tables and you don't have to write your VLOOKUPs, and you're expanding the data model itself rather than building on individual spreadsheets. I'm just quickly going to point to and show the Power Pivot backend. So about 2/3 of the people are actually using Power Pivot, but there's a third that are not. So this is the Power Pivot window. It's actually a separate application. Here down the bottom is the Power Pivot application, and here is the Excel application. And there's some tabs and there's rows and columns. So it sort of looks somewhat familiar. The main difference is that you need to learn to work in tables of data here. We're no longer working in spreadsheets, and you can't put individual formulas, and you can't even edit the data in this view. And then when you move to this second view, which is called the diagram view, this is where you create the relationships between your table. And this is the data modeling process, or part of the data modeling process. And this is the process that the IT department would normally do for you when they build a BI solution. And this is what a business analyst needs to learn if they're going to learn to be good at self-service business intelligence. And so before, when we wrote that VLOOKUP, we did a VLOOKUP in the sales table, and we went out to the product table and we fetched the product category, which is one of the columns in this table, and note how this relationship is joined between the product key of the sales table and the product key of the products table. And so whenever you make these relationships, you need to think about VLOOKUP. How would you do it if you were doing VLOOKUP? And that's exactly the same way that you do it here. And then the last thing I'll show you here is Power Query. Power Query is a fabulous tool. I didn't ask if people are using it, but if you're not using it, I really highly recommend that you start exploring it. It's a great tool. It's designed to go and fetch data from its source and to reshape and manipulate that data and then load it up into your data workbooks. So my Excel is not responding, which is quite unfriendly of it. So I'll just give that a second. I'm not quite sure why this is. Okay, I'm sorry. Just let me quickly restart Excel. Okay, I might skip over Power Query just in case that happens again, but Power Query is a tool to go and fetch the data, and you can reshape the data and then load it up into your data model. Okay, so the reason we're doing this in Excel is that ultimately we want to produce a report, and this is a report that I would typically produce in Excel, and you can see here I have a slicer and I can slice on calendar year, and I get a list of all of my product categories and what their sales performance is. Now, as you move to Power BI, it's not realistic to expect to be able to replicate this report exactly as it is on this page in Power BI, and in fact I recommend that you don't try and do that. My recommendation for Excel users is to think about what is the purpose of this report, which I've documented here. So I'm getting a visualized clue of how big each product is. I'm seeing the numbers. I'm able to drill on year. These are the key attributes of this report. So when you move to Power BI, rather than saying how can I build this pivot table, you should be saying how can I communicate these key points to my user base using the tools that are available within Power BI. And then if we look about a more complex example, so this is a report which gives me sales by category. It gives me year-to-date sales and change year-to-date, and when I click on the months, this report updates. So this is sort of like a dashboard, if you like. This formula here, total sales year-to-date, is written here in DAX. This is a relatively simple formula. The percentage change versus last year is a much more complex formula, and you certainly need to do some reading and learning to be able to write a formula like that. But I will emphasize that this is well within the reach of any competent Excel user to learn the DAX language, but you will have to go through that learning process. Okay, so with that in mind, we're going to move over to Power BI Desktop. I'm going to just close this down, and so there's actually two versions. In fact, let me just pause here again, sorry. So Johan, are there any questions at this point?
Yes, there are. From Guy, when you build solutions in Power Query, Power Pivots, does your client also have to have the add-ons installed to see the results? If so, what's the recommended methods?
So yes, you definitely do. So if you share a Power Query workbook with a user that doesn't have Power Pivot or Power Query, they'll be able to open the workbook. If there's a pivot table, they'll see the pivot table, but as soon as they start to click on a slicer, it basically won't work. So if you're in Excel 2013, you need Office Professional Plus in order to be able to get Power Pivot. And in fact, you need Professional Plus to be able to build the workbook, but you can view the workbook if you just have Office Professional. But my guess is that most organizations either have Professional Plus or they don't. If you're in Excel 2010, you have to download the plugin to do the authoring, and then if you want to share it with someone else, then they would need to install the plugin as well. And so my recommended approach is make sure that the people that need these tools have Power Pivot installed. The alternatives are to use some other distribution method, either SharePoint Enterprise, which is another whole topic, or potentially move to PowerBI.com.
Right. Then we got Gil. Do you think, the question was a bit difficult to read here, but do you think it will be a many relationship to the date table? Because now we have to create a separate date table for each date field you want to perform analysis on. This was Power Pivot.
It's okay, I understand the question. So, so in many data models, you may have multiple date fields within your data table. So a good example would be for a sales example, you might have an order date, a ship date, and an order close date, and a payment date even. And so basically there's two choices. You either create 4 copies of your calendar table. That's one option. Another option, in fact, is to only use a calendar table when you absolutely need it. Another option is you can make multiple relationships with the one table, but only one of those relationships will be active at any one time, and then using some DAX formulas, you're able to switch the relationship on the fly, on demand, to use one of the other relationships within your data model. So there's certainly solutions around that.
Stephanie asks, when does it make sense to choose modern Excel over Power BI?
Oh, good question. Power BI is still in development. Now, I can say openly, because I've certainly said this on my blogs, if I went back to August this year, I sort of put Power BI in the class of, wow, this is getting better, but I'm not quite ready to use it yet. As of October, November, the updates that came through were just amazing. And I've literally moved from being on a watching brief to a using brief, and I'm looking for opportunities to use Power BI now. So I think depending on your requirements, if you can't get what you need out of Power BI, then of course Excel would be a better fit. If you don't have large workbooks to move around, then Excel can be a good fit. Some companies are just not comfortable sharing their data via the cloud, and so once again Excel would be a good fit in those cases. I would expect that Power BI is going to continue to improve rapidly on a monthly basis, and I think the reasons not to make the move are going to diminish quite rapidly.
All right. Brian asks, where do you recommend to build the data model, in Power Pivot for Excel or Power BI Desktop? Are there any pros and cons?
Well, yes, I think there are. I mean, if you're going to end up in Power BI Desktop anyway, then my best guess or my best advice is to start in Power BI Desktop. I've noticed, I'm going to show you migration in a moment, but I've noticed that the migration from Excel to Power BI Desktop is not perfect, and it's much cleaner if you do it directly in Power BI Desktop. And secondly, and probably more importantly, the user interface for writing data models in Power BI Desktop is much better than Excel 2013 and 2010. It's a similar experience to 2016, but I haven't met too many companies using 2016 at this stage. So I think there's definite advantages of doing it natively in Power BI Desktop, provided you're going to do it in a Power BI solution in the end. If you want it both in Excel and Power BI, there's no backwards migration path. So if you're looking for an Excel version and a Power BI version, then you would do it in Excel first.
The questions are pouring in here, but should we continue? Perhaps?
Yeah, I think so. So now, because we've taken some of these questions, I'm going to run a little bit longer, Johan, so maybe to another 10 minutes, and then we'll leave time for the rest of the questions. Okay, so now we've made the move over to Power BI. So as I said, there's two versions. So first of all, here I am in a browser. This is This is Google Chrome. It works pretty much in any browser. And so I've logged in with my credentials to PowerBI.com, and this is what I get to see. I get some sections down the side here. I have my data models, I have the reports that I've written, and I have some dashboards. And so this is the sharing environment, not really where you do the data modeling, and we'll come back to this in a moment. The other place is PowerBI Desktop, and so this is a free app that you can download. The links are, just search for PowerBI download and you'll find it. And you'll see there are some similarities between Power Pivot that I showed you before. So here is the diagram view. It's called Relationships here in Power BI. This is the data sheet view, and then this is the reporting view. This is the reporting canvas, and this would be equivalent to your Excel spreadsheet where you do your pivot tables and charts. And then here is the visualization pane. This contains all of the different visualizations, very different to what's available in Excel. Now at the moment I don't have any data here, and so I'm just going to quickly show you the import experience if you're going to start from scratch in Power BI Desktop. So I'm going to get some data. In this case I'm going to bring it in from an Access database, but it could be any other data source that you have. This is very similar to the experience you have inside Excel with Power Pivot, so for those of you that have used that, this won't be hard for you at all. I'm going to import these 5 queries here. There is an option here to edit and start to transform these queries, so you can filter, reshape, pivot, unpivot. This is basically, this edit button is the Power Query application, but in this case my tables are set up for this demo, so I don't need to do any data manipulation. And as you can see here, it's importing the data. It's relatively quick, and now that I have this data imported, I can see my tables down the side here, just like we had in our Power Pivot workbook earlier. I'm going to jump over to the relationship view quickly. One really nice thing about Power BI Desktop, when you bring your tables in, on the assumption that your column names are the same, it will detect the relationship and correctly create the relationships between the tables. So I think that's a good bonus for Excel people, particularly as you're starting out. Just be aware that you need to understand how this works, but it is good that it does it for you. In the case where there is a different column name, so you can see I have order date and date, it's just a matter of dragging those columns like that to create those relationships. I'm not going to spend much more time on this workbook, so I'm moving pretty quickly. But lastly, if I now want to write a measure, then I just click on the New Measure button, and you'll see that for those of you that have used Excel Power Pivot, you'll see this is a better experience. So if I write total sales equals sum, you get color coding. It's probably hard to see on the screen, but that sum is in blue. And you also don't have to start with a table name. So if I do extended amount, it automatically finds any column with EX in the column. And so it's very quick to write these formulas. It's got auto bracket closing and visualization. So it's a much improved experience than writing these measures in Excel. And then you can go through and give it some formatting as you like. Okay, so that's the starting from scratch process, but given that I have written so many measures in my Excel workbook, I want to show you the other experience. So I'm not going to save that, and I'm going to start a new copy of Power BI Desktop, and this time I'm going to bring this AdventureWorks Excel workbook in. So there's a slightly different button to click on, so as my screen refreshes, when you're just bringing in raw data to the desktop, you use this one. If you're importing a workbook, you come down here, File, Import, Excel Workbook Contents, and go through this similar process. And I'm not going to take you through all these wizards. You can do this in your own time. There's an option to either leave the data. If you've got a linked table, you can leave it back in Excel, or you can copy it through, which is what I've done. And so Power BI Desktop goes through the process of analyzing your data model and it brings in all of here's the queries, which are basically Power Queries and the sourcing of the data. Here's the tables and the data model, and then all the KPIs and measures that have been written are all there. Now there's one important difference here, and that is that none of the visualizations get brought through. So any visualizations that you've done inside Excel are not going to come through. So I'm just going to open this AdventureWorks workbook, because remember this is the workbook that we basically want to try and build, use Power BI to build a tool that does these things, because I can't replicate the pivot table in Power BI Desktop. And so when you make that migration, none of those visualizations have come through. I'm just going to quickly jump over to the data model. I had this laid out in a specific way before. I like to put my lookup tables at the top and my data tables at the bottom. You also see an improved UI here. It indicates the one-to-many relationship, which is fundamental if you're writing VLOOKUPs. It's also fundamental to data modeling. And also it has these little arrows, and these arrows indicate the direction of the filter propagation, which is another big topic within Power Pivot, understanding how these tables relate to each other and how the filters propagate. If I jump back here, open up my table, and perhaps let's have a look at one of these measures. I'll take the total sales year-to-date change. So you can see here, once again, I'm not sure how well it comes out on the screen, but there's different color coding here for different color for measures, different color for formulas, and it's just generally a better experience when writing those measures. So it's a pretty reasonable migration path from Excel data models, although it's not perfect. Okay, so, but what really matters now is how do we build this visualization. So to start any visualization, you just come and select one of these visualizations. This matrix here is the closest fit to a pivot table, and so the general process is click on the visualization and then start to add some columns and measures to your visualization. So we're going to put products subcategory. Just click on that there and it puts it into the correct place in my visualization. And from the sales table, I'm going to bring total sales. And every visualization has these two buttons. So basically, this is the equivalent of the field list in Excel, and then this is where you can change the look and feel. And so I can come in here and increase the size of the font just to make it fit on the screen a little bit better. But there are some problems here. I mean, you can see that the full detail is not visible. That's not, you can't control that within a matrix. Also, on my pivot table, I had this sorted with a visualization in it. There's no option to sort here, and so I'm sure that will come, but as of today, a matrix cannot be sorted based on sales. Another good thing about Power BI is that if you don't like this visualization, you just select another one. And so you can just, while highlighting the visualization, click over here and it will change it to a different type of visualization. And in this case, there is a sort by feature. And so I can basically get a similar look and feel as I had in the pivot table before, but I'm using a different visualization technique. So, but I would expect that these visualizations are going to develop and be enhanced over time. So I need to quickly move on as we're running out of time. And so it is also possible to, I'm going to take a copy of this visualization. I'm just doing Control-C, Control-V. And so there is a visualization here that I really like, which is this tree map. And given the objective of my workbook was to be able to give some visual representation of how big each category is, this is a really good tool. And then I can change this to a slicer. In fact, I'm going to change this particular slicer and take off subcategory, and I'm going to put the calendar year, which was what we had there before, and turn it back to slicer. And so this works, gives you a similar experience, but once again, for Excel users, I encourage you to think differently. And so there are new capabilities. So I'm going to turn this chart into this slicer into a chart, and I'm going to put the sales here as well. And this is one of the great features of Power BI, is that you can click on any of these objects and it cross-filters the other object. Now, I don't particularly like this cross-filtering. When I click on a year here, this tree map stays the same shape but gives you like a pie chart visualization. But as I said, these things are changing all the time, and this was updated about 2 weeks ago, and so I can now edit this. I select this chart, and instead of filtering like a pie chart, I just want to do a straight filter. And so now, as I click on my sales for a particular year, it's very easy, and this tree map updates accordingly. And then just taking the thinking even further, I'm going to copy this again, Control-C, Control-V, take another copy of my chart, and this time I'm going to change this particular chart to a line chart, and instead of calendar year, I'm going to put calendar month or month name, and so now I've got a new visualization. And so if you think about the objectives, one objective was to be able to communicate the total sales values. You can see on my tooltips here that shows that. I can in fact also come in here, and there's a data labels option here which is currently off, and I'll put that like this. And so now, did I change that or not? Okay, I don't know why that's not working, but I did it on the wrong chart, that's why it's not working. Okay, so you can now see the data labels down the bottom here with a precision of thousands. So you can see the values. I can hover over any of these to see the absolute number, and I've got this new improved cross-filtering capability. So I've actually got more than I had with my traditional Excel workbook, would be the key message. Okay, so as I'm running out of time, the last thing, of course, is to share this. And so I'm going to save the workbook, and then you just simply click this Publish button. The first time you do it, you'll need to create an account. As I said, accounts are free to start, and once you start sharing, you may find that you need to purchase an account, a subscription, but it's relatively cheap. I think it's about $10 US per user per month or something like that. Okay, and then so if I come over, here's my workbook, there's my data set, and here's the report that I created. Everything works exactly as it did on my desktop, but now I can share this with other people. There are a couple of key things for sharing. So first of all, you need to pin one of these reports onto a dashboard. I'll just quickly create a new dashboard, and then I can share that dashboard up here using the share button. So look, we're out of time. It's 5 minutes to, so I need to wrap up. Sorry for rushing that towards the end. I do want to just I've got a couple of slides, key points to take away. I'll just build all those up. So you're not going to learn Power BI by watching YouTube videos. You need to get your hands dirty. So I encourage you, create an account, get in and start the process. You need to think in tables. It's not like Excel spreadsheets, so you need to make that move. Take a clean slate approach. Don't try and say, this is how I do it in Excel. I have to do it exactly the same in Power BI, because that's not going to work. You certainly need to learn the DAX language if you want to be any good. It's accessible, but you do have to learn it. And lastly, for the business analysts, I recommend you make friends with your IT department, because there's a mutual benefit here of them helping you be successful with self-service BI, and for you to get access to the data you need to build these reports. And here I have a where to learn more slide, which I'll make available. It's in the handouts, and so I won't spend any more time talking on these. So I'll hand back to Johan. Sorry, Johan, there's 5 minutes to go, but for any last questions.
Sure thing. Let's see now, there's too many actually, but let's see. Can Power BI visualizations be deployed to an existing SharePoint farm? And if so, what are the must-have?
That's a really good question. I don't I don't believe they can, but I know this space is changing all the time, and so I can't actually be 100% sure on that. I know they are doing some work on merging the capabilities, so I'm sorry I can't give you a straight, clear answer to that, but certainly PowerBI.com is where they're heading, and a lot of the SharePoint farm development I think you'll see taper off moving forward.
How can I share dashboards with users outside your organization?
So currently that's not possible. So one of the current limitations is you have to be on the same email domain. I'm sure that will change. I guess they're working through security issues and other issues. So as of today, that can't be done. If you did need to do that, you could create an account with the same email address domain and share it that way.
Would you still recommend using Power BI if you had to maintain both Power BI and Excel?
Look, it's no easy answer to that question. It depends on your specifics. It is possible to load your Excel data model directly onto PowerBI.com and then to build out your visualizations that way. So that may be an option. But if you have a need for both of them, then I would certainly build it in Excel, migrate it to PowerBI.com, and go from there. Yeah, but there's no easy answer. It depends on your needs.
I guess the next one has been answered. When you create a dashboard in Power BI and publish it to PowerBI.com and you refresh your reports, will your dashboard update automatically?
So once again, good question, difficult answer. So there's a couple of options. There is a gateway which allows you to connect the web service back to your environment, and that's relatively easy to configure. So if you configure that gateway, then yes, it will. The other option is that you can refresh your workbooks in PowerBI Desktop locally within your network environment, and then use a publishing methodology, either OneDrive for Business, or there's some tools available. Power Update is a tool specifically designed to doing just that. That's my preferred approach, not to worry about the gateway, but to do everything locally and then publish the Power BI Desktop file through to the cloud when you want to publish an update.
Can you create a list of measures from Power BI Desktop like you can from Excel?
I don't know. I assume not. When you do it in Excel, the best way I found to do it is using DAX Studio. You can certainly connect DAX Studio through to a Power BI desktop file, so you could definitely use DAX Studio as a method of doing that. Once there is some information on my website about DAX Studio and extracting measures if you want to go and search my blog.
And the ability to export a report to PDF, HTML, Word, or PBLT from BI Desktop or BI Online?
I don't believe that it's possible in BI Desktop or BI Online, but as I said, this is changing all the time, so today's answer might be wrong tomorrow. But there is a product, as I mentioned before, Power Update, which I use quite a bit. It's a commercial product. It's about $500 US, but that particular product allows you to email the results of your workbooks, create PDFs, publish to SharePoint, do all sorts of things, and so that may be a solution to that particular problem if you have it.
What is the difference between Power BI and DataZen to create dashboards?
Sorry, Power BI and what, sorry?
DataZen.
Oh, DataZen. Yeah, look, I don't know a lot about DataZen. I know Microsoft purchased it with the view of improving their mobile experience. In fact, I didn't mention that there's a Power BI Desktop mobile version. I can't give you a straight answer, so I won't try and pretend, but I would expect to see the technologies that they've bought with DataZen merge into the the mobile version of Power BI in the future.
I can just add there that Power BI, reporting services written from SQL Server 2016 will be DataZen or DataZen.
Okay.
So, yeah. Let's see now. With
so
Power
we're right
BI,
on 8 o'clock, I think.
Yeah, I think we are. I think we'll just have to wrap up there.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. This BA Marathon was brought to you by PASS, a not-for-profit organization which offers you year-round learning opportunities to data professionals. And if you're not a member yet, join today. Membership is free. Next slide. And stay tuned for our next session, which is making informed decisions, guidelines for creating an effective dashboard with the Rick Grantham. And thank you all for attending.
Okay, thank you.